Hello everyone, my name's Luca from Ofcom. Not the Ofcom that you probably are familiar with when you say the word Ofcom in content and broadcasting circles. You think of obviously the code and the incoming media bill and all the things that we do around investigating complaints and so on and so forth. I work in a different part, so I oversee the team that does research into media literacy at Ofcom. And you may or may not know that pretty much since Ofcom started around 20 years ago, we've been running an ongoing program of market research, of consumer research, looking at media literacy amongst adults on the one hand and children and parents on the other. And being a yearly thing, being both quantitative and qualitative, it's a really, really rich source of insight, not just for the moment, for each year, but obviously as we do it over time, we can look at trends and understand how things have evolved. And of course, the whole media world has changed massively in the last 20 years. If you think about all the tech developments that have happened since sort of the mid 2000s. So it's a really, really rich source of insight. The media literacy bit, let me cover that. So by media literacy, in the context of what I'm going to talk about, we mean, and in the children's context, we mean, broadly speaking, the extent to which children have the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding to navigate the online world productively, creatively, and safely. So I'll be looking today with my sort of media literacy hat on, that notion of safety, as much as I will be looking at the clear opportunities that media developments are giving content creators. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword, so I'll be referring as much to the opportunities as to the risk as I will to the opportunities. So in terms of the sources I'll be talking about today, the two key ones, and these are all on our website. I do urge you to go there because it's rich, as I say, there's a whole data set going back to 2004 or 5, I think, with the quant, and just a year or so afterwards for the qual on the right there. So basically, on the left there, you can see we report every year on the quantitative trackers from the Children and Parents Media Tracking Study. So last year, that involved around 10,000 interviews amongst children and their parents covering the ages of 3 up to 17. We don't interview 3-year-olds directly. Be pleased to hear. We ask parents about 3 to 7-year-olds, and then from the age of 8, we start asking more direct questions amongst that age group. And then on the right, you have our media live study, which is it's longitudinal. So over the past, it's now entering its 10th year. So over the last 10 years, having recruited a group of 8 to 17-year-olds, we go in, our agency goes into their houses, they talk to them, observe what they're doing, they get a sense of the household dynamic, then they talk to the child about what they're doing online, probing questions around things to do with media literacy, with in understanding information, with understanding algorithms, all the rest of it. Pandemic gave that a bit of a bolt, as it did for most people involved in market research. Face-to-face wasn't possible for a couple of years, so we did a bit more, obviously, online. We now mix about half online, half in-home. The in-home thing is really important. You have to kind of be there to understand, I think, particularly the dynamics between the parent and the carer and the children, and indeed siblings. These often aren't seen in the figures around children's research, but the household dynamic is really, really important. Hopefully we capture some of that. And as I say, we publish these reports every year, so please do have a closer look. I mean, whatever you take away from what I'm saying, it's going to be very brief, but there's a lot of data there and a lot of information in those reports, including something we initiated just last year, which is a bit of a step-by-step look through different age groups of children. And I think some of the stuff I've seen at the conference today have also tried to make an understanding of how tastes change, how device take-up changes, how parental influence change as a child ages. And there's this sort of intertwining connectivity that we need to be aware of things such as I say, device ownership, social connectivity, cognitive development, emotional maturity, and of course parental oversight. And what we find, broadly speaking, is that the older the child gets, the more devices they are familiar with and have the ability to use and navigate, the more independent they become. Their tastes become, as you're saying, younger children love repeat. They just want to watch the same thing again and again. As they get older, they start maybe to repeat different stories, maybe with the same characters or brands. But as they get even older, then they start to branch out, as we call it, and become more fragmented and maybe more tribal in the sort of tastes that they have. So it is very much a progressive thing. At the same time, parental oversight tends to fade away, and it's replaced more, I suppose, in a healthy relationship, more with parental trust. So all these things at work across the age of the child as they grow up, which you have to sort of bear in mind whenever we look at children's research. So I'm going to talk about games today because again, every year throws up some really, really interesting stuff about what children's media diets. Gaming's been around for forever. We know that, and it's no surprise to when I say that it ranks really, really highly in children's media activities. But it really is quite an ubiquitous thing. So here you see the top ranking activity online for children is, as you might expect, is watching videos. That means basically YouTube, the social media platforms, the video sharing platforms. That's a ubiquitous go-to medium for children. But not far behind that is gaming, electronic gaming of all sorts of forms, some of it online, some of it not, we'll come on to that. But it's over 90% of all children 3 to 17 claim to play games on an electronic device. So that's not massively surprising. One thing that might be is that it's not the preserve of boys. It used to be seen maybe as a thing that boys would do. It's maybe a bit hobby, a bit geeky. That's not the case. It's quite ubiquitous. And we see that girls are as likely to be playing games online, or electronic games, I should say, as are boys. It's only at the age of from sort of 16 upwards that we see a bit more of a gap opening between girls and boys gameplay. So I think that's something to bear in mind, that today's typical girl is as likely to be into games or gaming culture as today's typical boy. And that's something that starts from quite a young age. Where we do see differences are in terms of device. So at the younger end, the tablet, often that shared tablet with the parent, is much more the device that's used for gaming, whereas amongst older people, the smartphone, remember the smartphone is something that over 3/4 of, I think, 9-year-olds in the UK have a smartphone by the age of 8 to 9. So that takes over, as does the console. And one difference between boys and girls when it comes to gaming is that boys are much more likely to be playing on a console than girls. We also know, and from our survey stats, that it's not just about gaming levels, it's also the kind of games that are being played. Again, some interesting similarities, but also some interesting sort of variations between girls and boys. So it's the creative games like Minecraft, Roblox, a platform where you can sort of search and almost make your own games, is actually up there for both boys and girls. But then you see the divergence. So with boys, it's more about the multiplayer, the shooter, the action games, maybe more competitive with others, where with the girls, it's more about puzzles and quizzes, playing in a virtual world, but maybe more introspective, more where it's the individual addressing the gameplay. And we see that these different approaches to gaming and that sort of choice of gaming actually affects how parents view their children gaming. So in our qual sample, it was the boys who was talking about playing very, very focused on a small number of quite competitive games, whether that's sort of sporting or shooter or action games. And they're kind of investing a lot more time and so often a lot more money in these sorts of games than girls, who conversely were playing, as they told us in our qual sample, a wider spread of games, but often free-to-play, solo player, where that notion of status, of peer, competitive and peer competition wasn't as important. And what's interesting about that is that because again, our tracker study also, there's a part of that module of that survey is to talk to parents, and we ask parents what kind of rules they have in place, if any, when it comes to their children's media activities, including gaming. And you'll see that parents of boys are more likely to have rules in place than they are of girls. So when that comes to the purchases, downloading of games, when it comes to the time they're allowed to spend on games, and when it comes to with or whom they want them to play games. So, we spent some time looking at gameplay and some keen differences between girls and boys. Another thing that our qual interviews remind us of, and I think, again, it's not a huge insight for us to hear today, is that the appeal of gaming isn't just restricted to playing a game. We all know already that much of gaming is consumed passively. It's kind of watched. And I still remember when I think my daughter, who's now 12, when she was 10, she's really into Zelda on a Nintendo Switch, and she was just sitting on the sofa watching YouTube, watching people play Zelda with someone commentating. And I said, well, how can you just sit there and watch someone else playing a computer game? And she looked at me and said, well, you sit there and watch people commentating on other people playing football. So, where's the difference? And I had to say I didn't have an answer for that, because that's really how it is. It is an all-consuming interest. It's not just about being the one taking part. It's an interest in that game and the culture around it. But today it's not just perhaps passively watching, commentary, maybe tips on gameplay that people go to move away from actual playing of the game. It's actually, there seems to be a whole new culture. Oops, sorry, go ahead again. Almost like an ecosystem now of gaming-related content, which is inspired by games but doesn't necessarily actually involve any gameplay. And it's really, it really strikes us how much that's now part of a child's. It's no longer a game thing; it's an entertainment thing. So part of the child's entertainment diet may often have the game or the culture around gaming or the development of games or the history of games as the key theme behind it. And we have sort of influencers. Often quite brashly, sometimes it's quite light-hearted, sometimes it's quite gossipy, it can involve quite a lot of conflict and drama. It can involve influencers setting up their own competitions for their followers, often very high stakes based on games. But ultimately they are speaking to a growing community of children for whom gaming is a premise for entertainment rather than the entertainment itself. Another aspect of gaming that it's clear is maybe much more important to children than we might think is around communication. So, as you know, obviously online games allow for interactive play, and that can involve text, audio or video communication and chat with fellow gamers. And again, an example of my own children, so when my son was now 13, when he was 10 or 11, he moved from primary to secondary school. Some of his friends went to other schools. And his primary platform, his primary channel of communicating, chatting and staying in touch with his friends was the games he played with them. So it performed that really good function. And that, I think is a positive of how these games can keep people connected. But there are of course, a few concerns around that too. Because if you look at some of the stats when we ask children about what they do in terms of connectivity and communication, they're playing games with others. That's all part of the competition, part of the appeal of especially those sporting and competitive games. They're chatting to people they know online, as my son is to his friends and everyone I'm sure we know as well. However, it's also the fact that a quarter of 8 to 17s are playing against someone they don't know. Okay, that's fine too probably, but here on the bottom right we see that 22%, so around a fifth of gamers aged 8 to 17 say they are chatting with, whether it might be vocal, it might be audio, visual, it might be just text, with people they don't know outside of the game. So it's effectively talking to strangers via gaming. So that's a media literacy issue. Yeah, how far are they aware that there are potential risks attached to that kind of activity, which is something that we have to keep tabs on. So where next? The final thing to talk about is if you think about what's at least the short-term future of games. Again, our qual sample, the gamers we spoke to in our media live study, and continue on that theme of opportunities and risk. It seems that we're being told they're spending more and more time in immersive environments and interactive spaces, and this seems to be where, at least in the short term, the future of gaming is. And we're not just talking about a fully blown sort of metaverse. We're talking about things, an example that was talked about quite a bit spontaneously was things like Rec Room, where participants can, with avatars, go to spaces. They can make their own spaces. It's a socially interactive space. They can take part in conversation. They can take part in games. They can build new areas. I mean, it is actually a melting pot of creativity and of self-expression. So from that point of view, it's a really, really positive development in terms of connectivity and social interaction. But of course, with my Ofcom media literacy hat on, these environments do obviously potentially present more of a risk for child participants, because you could argue that the kind of risks we saw just chatting in a normal game, traditional gaming environment, are augmented. The more immersive a game is, studies do show, the more that the child's traditional critical faculties are being challenged and stretched, because the environment is able to it makes them sort of almost bypass that. So when we think of immersive environments, we do have to think about, again, are there enhanced risks in terms of people children connecting with strangers, for example, the potential for bullying, for more immersive, dare I say, types of bullying behaviour, violent or scary themes, and another area of gaming which I haven't talked about too much, but which is in game spending, and there are obviously new opportunities for commercial activity in immersive environments, which is developing so quickly. It's very, very hard to keep tabs on, but it's just one of those things to be aware of. So that's kind of it really. And I think just as takeaways for today, I mean, as I say, it was just scratching the surface. Do go and look at our reports on the website. There's a lot more on this and other forms of communication and media activity and media diet. Just to take away, really, I think the main thing to say is, if you weren't aware already, gaming is not a niche thing. It's not a minority thing. It is an integrated part of a typical boy or girl's media life. Secondly, it's not about the game. The games are important for people. People spend a lot of hours, but they spend a lot of hours not playing games, but with games and gaming. And that culture is already, we think, it's a thriving genre already in itself. And the last thing to say really is, again, particularly for those who are interested in child online safety, immersive and interactive environments are definitely where it's at. It's where a lot of the investment is from the big gaming producers are. But it does also present new, often kind of unknown concerns when it comes to child online safety. That was it, really. And here's the little plug at the end. Our website, if you go to something called Making Sense of Media, that's where all our media literacy research and outreach and guidance and all the rest of it can be found. So have a look, have a dig around. Hopefully you'll find something that you'll find of benefit. And that's that. So any questions, please?
My name's Constance. I live in Bristol, and there's a woman there called Angela Loveridge, and she does training for parents and teachers, because when we talk about this media literacy, we hear about, we all need to improve everyone's media literacy, but actually finding the training or informal training for people. So I just think I was just going to flag up her project, which seems to be a really good idea. But I didn't know whether you've already come across people like her.
We do our best. So there are, we have a network. It's called the Making Sense of Media Network, and we do as much as we can because often the best practitioners are hyper-local. They're working with particular communities in particular areas. Often we're in deprived areas or people with particular needs, and that's where often media literacy is most required. And so, I top of head, I don't recognise the name, but we do make sure that we learn from. Because ultimately, it's about on the ground, the idea of what actually works. And by the way, media literacy isn't just a children thing; it's an adult thing. And we think there's a huge deficit in media literacy, or at least variation across different, like socioeconomic groups, for example, some regionality, where we just see that media literacy vary an awful lot to a worrying degree. So, but thank you for that. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you. It was really interesting. I'm just wondering if you've got any work around when young people go onto gaming. You talked about safety and protecting them and stuff like that. What work have you done around a young person going from gaming into problem gambling and spending parents' credit cards and stuff like that?
No, really good point. We're aware of it. We haven't. We did some stuff a couple of years ago. You'll find on the website around loot boxes, which is a kind of a start of gambling for kids in games. So basically, you come across something, you buy it for tokens or indeed cash or whatever the currency is, and you might get something in this loot box or you might not. That's effectively, and it's kind of thrilling and it's fun and it's very much integrated into the game, into the adventure, whatever. But it's gambling. It's an early introduction to gambling. We haven't done any sort of longitudinal connection studies like here's the journey, here they start, but we are aware that it's an issue, and we do have to work with other bits of the industry to understand that more. But no, it's absolutely something that, I mean, that's one area. There's also those who maybe the grooming often starts, unfortunately, in these interactive environments where a child is taken from a game onto a different platform, then maybe another one, and then they're in a completely different world and really vulnerable too. So short answer is no, but we are very much aware of it as a threat.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, have you ever researched how many female feature avatars versus male feature avatars there are in, let's say, boyish games, because recently I started to play pool, which is kind of neutral game on my mobile phone, and I've noticed that there is like 5 female avatars versus 50 male avatars in this kind of simple game. So the question is actually the boys' games are female friendly?
That's a really good question. Short answer, no, we haven't done that level of granular sort of auditing of of exactly your question, but I just think it's really important and really interesting, and I suspect that as we move into more immersive worlds and we use more visual cues, that yes, creators are not reflecting, representing diversity as it should be. So I think it's a really good question, and I don't know what the answer is, but I suspect you're right, that there's still a big imbalance there.
Hi. So there's a slide where you were showing that girls and boys are pretty much equal in terms of gaming until it gets to 16 to 17, and then it changes. Is that changing? Are you seeing a trend that the gap's closing, or does that kind of remain?
No, it is. So we've noticed over the past few years that girls are gaming a little bit longer. So it might have been up to the age of sort of maybe the band's a little bit broad, up to the 15 that we saw it start to drop off. So yeah, it's actually closing in terms of longevity of appeal, and I think that's a lot to do with the fragmentation of games and the design of them, and the fact that hopefully they are catering for all sorts of people, girls, boys, and everything else.
Yeah, with what you just said about the girls increasingly playing at the age of 18 and stuff, and also in a more general sense, was the pandemic, did you see a big, boost in general gaming in that period?
Yeah, we did. There was an uplift. It wasn't huge. It wasn't as if everyone, just because they were at home and nothing else to do, gamed more. I think there was an uplift in a lot of media consumption, including, we saw before, streaming content. Another thing is, of course, we haven't touched on here, but we do look at on our reports, is access and inclusivity. So for a lot of people in households, especially with more than one child, they can't afford necessarily the equipment, the console, indeed the broadband access that's required to play at a higher level. So I think those households that did have games continued to game and maybe spent more hours doing it, but there wasn't really a huge growth in terms of people take up of say, consoles. But we did see a slight uptick.
I saw you mentioned a few games like Fortnite, FIFA. I was thinking about Roblox as well, if there's any trends towards Roblox. And then the second question is like the content around gaming. Is that something that audiences want to see outside of platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or is that kind of going to stay there for now? Or would you see that go over to like other services?
That's a really good question. I mean, Roblox, absolutely, yeah. Sorry, there was a slide that I'd accidentally hidden, so I skipped over it and then panicked and didn't go back to it and unhide it. But Roblox and Minecraft are up there, so that was the first level. Because as you know, Roblox is a platform that's got so loads of different games on it, and there's something that caters for everyone really on there. Very popular. In terms of this sort of content appearing on other channels, well, I think it's self-perpetuating, but where children are now, which is on those video sharing platforms and on YouTube, is where they're tending to watch the stuff. I suppose it's the job of other channels to promote, market this content and show that it is elsewhere in the ecosystem. But we do know that it's a stark fact that the likes of YouTube and other video sharing platforms and the social media channels dominate. Certainly those younger children, not younger, let's say 8+ children's. It's the destination for content. Full stop. So it's very, very. I think it's very, very, very hard to get that transferred to other channels such as SVOD and BVOD and what have you. But I hope it does. I mean, this is content that is genuinely loved by children, so it should really be anywhere other content is for children.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm going to be one of those people with a comment, not a question, but it's in response to the boys and girls and gender question previously. So from working with various research in games, 100% there is a lot more in traditionally boys games, boy avatars. But there is also a lot more of inherent creativity, avatars that are a lot more gender fluid. I think it will adjust, but it's an interesting opportunity to look at it from the other angle, because looking at TV, we've been, I think, better at encouraging the traditionally boy-skewed things to include girls. Like, you almost can't pitch a show with 5 boys, but there's opportunities the other way around, and traditionally female things to include more gender diversity and allow boys or anyone who's into what those topics are to find themselves. So I think it's more across all of the spectrum, not just boy games. And no questions.
Yeah, thank you. There's one. Oh, there's one just here.
Hi, just a quick one. Have you noticed any trends in sort of gacha games, sort of surprise pull kind of content? My 12-year-old daughter, going on 15, basically she's very into Genshin Impact and Cookie Run Kingdom and things that they can have sort of surprise pulls on, but it keeps them going for more, and they invest sort of, more time and energy in that. So yeah, just because I haven't seen that really come up in research, but I know that there's quite a lot of her friends who play it, so I just wondered if that was...
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I have to confess, I don't know. We in our surveys, we capture as much as we can. And obviously, because of the very fragmented nature of games and the platforms they appear on, and the one player and the multiplayer, the console stuff and all that, and then the more simple social media stuff, it's really hard to get everything. I suspect we have a very, very long tail of data that I wouldn't dream of putting up on the wall, with a lot of different types of games that are being mentioned at low level by children in the sample. So it may well be that that's the next big thing, or that is a big thing. We sample twice yearly, deliberately in order to pick up, because things change so quickly. So it may well be that in our next 6 monthly data set, we find that genre of game coming through. But I can't say I've seen it myself in the recent data set. Yeah, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for that. At the beginning, you sort of talked about the potential benefits and of the area and the risks, and you showed a slide with some of the sort of really clearly obvious risks. Does Ofcom look at some of the more subtle, harder to sort of assess risks that, whether some types of media have an impact on things like children's attention? So is there any sort of attempt to try and unpack some of those complex arguments?
Yeah, I mean, we are, so again, under our media literacy duties, which have been there from the start, that kind of question is very much something that we need to be aware of and understand. We don't have any primary research into that question, but we do work with charities and other organisations who are really, really absolutely onto those kind of questions so that we can understand it. But I mean, I think, yeah, that's a kind of, we're aware that it's an issue. I mean, and there are many, as you said, there are many other more subtle risks and potential harms that come from all sorts of media consumption that we are aware of. But in terms of sort of measuring it, we kind of, I suppose, leave that to those who are very much at the forefront of that research. So yeah, I couldn't really tell you anything from our data set that we have online much about that. Anecdotally, we can talk about it. Some of the qualitative, the longitudinal study, we have got notes from the agency who will say, yeah, that this person is struggling with this, or that person is clearly got an issue with attention or whatever it is. But as a hard measure, it's not something that we do. Sorry. Oh, should we do one more? Because I'm conscious we need to get the room clear in order for a turnaround for the next one. So should we maybe have one more? Then I've also got to read this card. So.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was any trends, and I may have missed this, so apologies, but whether there are trends in relation to parental attitudes seeming to shift, because you have parent survey as well.
No, that's really interesting. Not hugely. It's a fairly, so the question, the stats you saw around, having rules in place, the notion of who should be responsible child, or should all those questions about the child being able to take own risk, be independent versus parental oversight. Those things I think have remained stable. I think they're kind of, or in even an offline world, they're kind of stable. Some parents are much more about give the child independence. Some are much more cautious than that, and that's, I think, just the nature of the individual. But what we have noticed recently is that more children themselves, so there's a couple of measures in our surveys that we looked at amongst 12 to 17-year-olds where we ask if they've taken any action recently to, for instance, spend less time online, to stop using certain apps. And we have found an uplift in that in the last year. So it seems that maybe this notion of self-awareness of too much time spent, for example, or an obsession with a particular thing, that maybe there's a maturity and understanding amongst younger people that these things could be a problem, and there's a bit more self-regulation going on, which is interesting. But yeah, in terms of parental, the last 5 years, I'd say not huge changes in that.
My name's Constance. I live in Bristol, and there's a woman there called Angela Loveridge, and she does training for parents and teachers, because when we talk about this media literacy, we hear about, we all need to improve everyone's media literacy, but actually finding the training or informal training for people. So I just think I was just going to flag up her project, which seems to be a really good idea. But I didn't know whether you've already come across people like her.
We do our best. So there are, we have a network. It's called the Make It to Media Network, and we do as much as we can to, because often the best practitioners are hyper-local. They're working with particular communities in particular areas. Often we're in deprived areas or people with particular needs, and that's where often media literacy is most required. And so, I top of head, I don't recognise the name, but we do make sure that we learn from. Because ultimately, it's about on the ground, the idea of what actually works. And by the way, media literacy isn't just a children thing; it's an adult thing. And we think there's a huge deficit in media literacy, or at least variation across different, like socioeconomic groups, for example, some regionality, where we just see that media literacy vary an awful lot to a worrying degree. So, but thank you for that. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you. It was really interesting. I'm just wondering if you've got any work around when young people go onto gaming. You talked about safety and protecting them and stuff like that. What work have you done around a young person going from gaming into problem gambling and spending parents' credit cards and stuff like that?
No, really good point. We're aware of it. We haven't. We did some stuff a couple of years ago. You'll find on the website around loot boxes, which is a kind of a start of gambling for kids in games. So basically, you come across something, you buy it for tokens or indeed cash or whatever the currency is, and you might get something in this loot box or you might not. That's effectively, and it's kind of thrilling and it's fun and it's very much integrated into the game, into the adventure, whatever. But it's gambling. It's an early introduction to gambling. We haven't done any sort of longitudinal connection studies like here's the journey, here they start, but we are aware that it's an issue, and we do have to work with other bits of the industry to understand that more. But no, it's absolutely something that, I mean, that's one area. There's also those who maybe the grooming often starts, unfortunately, in these interactive environments where a child is taken from a game onto a different platform, then maybe another one, and then they're in a completely different world and really vulnerable too. So short answer is no, but we are very much aware of it as a threat. Thanks very much.